one of the big accusations that Cooper alleges is that Churchill was funded by Zionists. And this came up in the Tucker Carlson interview.
Yes.
But this originates with David Irving.
That's right, yes.
I wondered if you might, I mean, what he exactly said was, as time goes on, you read these stories about Churchill going bankrupt and needing money, getting bailed out by people who shared his interests in terms of Zionism.
Yeah.
But also his hostility to Germany was real, he emphasizes. Now, it's a little bit of a skirting or loose nod to this idea, which is a David Irving idea.
Yeah.
Am I right? Can you explain to me what Irving's theory about Zionists backing Churchill was?
Well, it's not really. I mean, what Darrell Cooper says, building on what Irving, with his obsession as Churchill as a villain, says, is that he went bankrupt and Jewish financiers and media moguls put Churchill, as it were, back on his feet again out there. But this is all absolute nonsense. I mean, Churchill was a member of one of the richest families in Britain, the Duke of Marlborough, owners of Blenheim Palace and so on. Definitely a member of the British upper classes. He did support the idea of a state of Israel, but the idea there's a kind of huge Jewish conspiracy backing Hitler, backing Churchill against later on against Hitler. It's a classic conspiracy theory, joining the dots in a way that seems to suggest one thing, where it's all built on tissue of disinformation, essentially.
Right. But there was, regardless of Churchill's background, it was the case that he was constantly sort of on the edge of being broke, and would then write, he
wrote. He was like not the only British Prime Minister. Lord Salisbury was the same earlier on, that he did support himself, not least by his writing, selling, and he was a great stylist.
Yeah, but it was true that he struggled with money, right? That he
sometimes, yes.
So, and then the idea is that there was some sort of lobbying interest group that Irving and Cooper might allege were entirely Zionists.
And I think, yes, I mean that's the problem. When you smell a rat every time you hear anybody talking about a Jewish lobby. That is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. No group in the modern world has been as divided as the Jewish community, and you can still see that today. You can see that there's a massive opposition in Israel against Netanyahu's treatment of Gaza, for example. So you wouldn't believe that just to read the media.
It's also another part of portraying Churchill as a chief villain is to paint him as a terrorist, which is what Darrell Cooper does.
Yeah.
He actually calls the burning down sections of the Black Forest just rank terrorism. This is by 1940. Now, it's worth examining what exactly happened in...
Not by 1940, no.
That's what Cooper says.
Well...
so it'd be interesting. So maybe he's actually factually incorrect when he says it's 1940.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to, but the point is that this is about the bombing campaign.
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, this is pure Goebbels. This is the Nazi propaganda chief who describes it as terror bombing or terrorism. And terrorism is a word that is kind of bandied about far too much, I think, and has been for a while. Terrorism is the idea that you cause terror among a population that you don't approve of. And that didn't work with the Nazi bombing and what we call in Britain the Blitz, the bombing of London in 1940. It didn't work with the British bombing campaign against German cities in 1940, essentially 43 to 45.
There's something in the order that seems to be missed out, because firstly, it's the Germans who start the bombing. They're the ones who are the first in the Second World War to carry out bombing campaigns, not least Poland, part of
that began,
Warsaw.
Yeah, that began above all with the German Condor Legion, which is a kind of volunteer group of German bombing crews who bombed the Basque city of Guernica in 1936 at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, because they were supporting General Franco, the right wing rebels against the legitimate government of Spain, and that was widely seen as a war crime, and indeed it caused a lot of worry and anxiety amongst the German population of the big cities, as well as the British in London and Liverpool and other cities, because there's no really effective defence against the mass aerial bombing, against strategic bombing, and that proved to be the case in World War II. But also, on the other hand, the idea that the British, particularly so-called Mr. Arthur Harris, head of Bomber Command, had, that you could, if you made life bad enough for ordinary civilians in Berlin or Hamburg, that they would rise up and rebel. That was wrong as well. There was a lot of anger against the Nazi government because of the bombing campaign. But no, the conditions weren't right. I mean, the Nazi repression the screws were tightened down when you get discontent emerging after the bombing of Hamburg, for example.
But that doesn't mean that the British didn't have a plan to try and sow discontent, because it might have been possible to
that's right.
get achieved. But so is it true that was a strategy of war for the British?
That was Arthur Harris's idea, and it was completely wrong, of course.
Wrong why?
It was wrong, yeah, it didn't work.
Oh, it's wrong that it didn't work, but it was a strategy.
Yes, it was. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
But you can't say that it was just a British invention. As you said, it was begun by the Germans in the bombing of London, and before that, bombing of Rotterdam, and before that, the Blitzkrieg. The Blitzkrieg means lightning war. And what you did is you sent over, as has happened with Poland in particular, in 1939, the German invasion of Poland. What happened was you send in your bombers, they bomb all the enemy airfields, they bomb the troop units and so on, and then after that you send in, because you've established supremacy in the air above all by destroying enemy aircraft, you send in armoured columns, tanks essentially, and following them you send in the infantry on the ground, and that worked amazingly well with the invasion of Poland in 1939, which was over in just a few weeks. And the Poles fought very bravely, but they didn't have the equipment. They didn't have the strategy. And of course, where that went, and it worked again with the invasion of France, and then Denmark, and to slightly less well with Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands. It worked in 1940. Where it didn't work was in the invasion of the Soviet Union, of Russia, because you can pin the Poles up against the Russian border. You can pin the British Expeditionary Force and the French up against the Channel, but Russia's endless expanse of steppe. You can't have a blitzkrieg chasing the Russians all the way back to Vladivostok and the Pacific. And the Russians had huge resources of manpower and equipment, absolutely massive. And Stalin rallied the morale after initial panic. So the blitzkrieg attempt to wage a blitzkrieg against the Russians failed completely. Already by December 1941, just 6 months after the invasion, it had ground to a terrifying halt.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode, and for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.